Well, Federal Labor's special platform conference is underway in southwestern Sydney, with the party trying to simplify its message to voters ahead of the next election. Former Labor leader Bill Shorten introduced his successor Anthony Albanese, saying Labor can win the next poll with bold ideas against a stale coalition government. Mr Albanese had earlier pledged to establish a $15 billion reconstruction fund to bolster the nation's manufacturing industry. Political reporter Matthew Doran is at the conference.
We're here at the Federal Labor Conference in southwestern Sydney at the Revesby Workers Club. Quite a different looking Labor conference this time around, considering it's basically all virtual, with 400 delegates meeting on Zoom to try to nut out some changes to the Labor Party platform. One of Labor's federal frontbenchers is Linda Burney, the Shadow Social Services Minister and Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians. Thank you for making some time for us today.
My pleasure.
Let's pick up on what has been a topic, I guess, not just here at the conference, but more broadly, the topic of respect for women in Australia. We saw the ministerial reshuffle announced yesterday, extra women getting senior roles in the Morrison government, and new portfolios added to some existing women serving on the front bench. Is that something that you welcome, that you'd like to see?
A couple of points there. Obviously, Labor wishes to work collaboratively with the government on addressing what is not just an issue about respect for women in the parliament, but more broadly across society. But I do think that the Prime Minister is still left wanting. I mean, he cannot farm out his responsibilities as Prime Minister on this issue of respect for women to just the women in the Liberal National Party, and it feels a bit like he's done that. I hope that we get some good outcomes, but just adding responsibility to women's portfolios is not the answer to the problem. He has to recognise that he is the Prime Minister and he has a responsibility in this as well.
Would you go so far as to say that this is a reflection that the coalition has been failing on certain issues when it comes to women, and hence why you've got people like Jane Hume being given the specific responsibility for economic security, or Anne Ruston looking at women's safety?
Well, Jane Hume had the idea of women escaping violence should raid their superannuation to get out of violent situations, which was a terrible idea, and I'm glad that the government recognised that. A lot of pressure from Labor and walked away from that policy. I really hope that the task force that the Prime Minister has set up is successful, but it will only be successful if it's willing to consult and if it's willing to listen to voices of women that don't necessarily have a forum to have their views expressed in. And by that I mean particularly First Nations women, whom we know are terribly overrepresented in terms of homicide, in terms of violence, in terms of hospitalisation. Women with disability, enormously overrepresented in terms of putting up with abuse, and of course women from a diverse English-speaking background, called women. That's really, really important.
That is an area which you have interest in as well, not only from your portfolio responsibilities, but your lived experience as well as a First Nations Australian. On the issue of Indigenous relations, the issue of constitutional recognition is something that is not going away, and it won't be going away anytime soon, and as you would be campaigning to do so. There was some debate in the Labor conference today to do with policies relating to Indigenous recognition. Can you explain what they were?
So what happened today is that Labor reaffirmed through the platform its absolute commitment to the whole Uluru Statement. And there were three elements to that: constitutional recognition, a voice to the Parliament, constitutionally enshrined, the establishment of a Makarrata Commission that would have the responsibility to oversee a national process of truth-telling as well as treaty and agreement making. All of those elements critical to the Uluru Statement and absolutely fundamental and supported by the Labor caucus and this platform conference.
The issue of constitutional recognition, there's been a lot of debate about whether or not that would go ahead. We know the Prime Minister has said that that is not on the agenda at the moment. How much of that is reliant on the fact that there would need to be a policy or a platform that is put forward that does have bipartisan support, that does have a possibility of being voted in favour of by the Australian people to get that over the line?
Yes.
How important is that element?
The point that you're making, Matt, is absolutely critical in my view. It is confusing as to what the Prime Minister's position is. We've heard so many different things, and of course the Prime Minister is now saying that it's not the policy of the Liberal Party. In fact, I can tell you that Minister Wyatt's working groups, the whole 3 working groups, were forbidden, absolutely forbidden, to deal with the Uluru Statement, and I'm just very pleased that this platform conference and the Labor caucus is 100% the 3 elements of the Uluru Statement.
Noel Pearson, in a speech the other week
Yes.
at the National Museum in Canberra, he seemed to suggest that there should be some bipartisanship here, or at least there needs to be some responsibility taken
Yes.
from Labor as well for how it's handled this debate over the last few years. Do you agree with that?
I think Labor has been pretty magnificent, actually. And
We could file that in the Linda Burney would say that, wouldn't she, sort of category.
well, you could say that, but let's think about it. For a constitution or a referendum change, there really does need to be the bipartisan support that you've just spoken about. Very hard to see how you get a referendum to be successful unless there's bipartisan support. And I just think, you know, what an amazing legacy it would be for Scott Morrison to be the Prime Minister, to bring about recognition of First Peoples in the Constitution. Extraordinary legacy, and I urge him to think about that and think about his place in history. The points that Noel has made, in a sense, lead to the same thing that we're saying, that there should be a voice to the Parliament and it has to be constitutionally enshrined. He has a slightly different view to me and the Labor Party on how we might get there, but the end goal is the same.
Well, how do you think we get there, considering it is such a seemingly fraught path?
Look, I guess you could say it's a fraught path, but to me, what people at Uluru asked for was incredibly modest. They're not asking for a voice to the Parliament that would have any veto power. It has an advisory role. It does not usurp the role or the sovereignty of the Parliament. That was never, ever the intention. And I have spent a lot of time thinking about this and talking to people, and it would seem to me that the pathway to constitutional recognition firstly comes from a bipartisan commitment to that, and then for a referendum to be held in the not too distant future. And that if the case is argued, if it's explained properly, I've got no doubt that the Australian people, with their sense of fairness and justice, would see this as the next obvious step in developing us as a nation.
Just finally, Linda Burney, this is a vastly different Labor conference than what we've seen
certainly
before.
is.
It's not your first rodeo. You've seen a lot of these conferences over the years. Some of the criticism that's being put out there is the fact that we're not seeing the same level of debate on amendments to the policy platform that we would normally. Not only are we dealing with COVID-19 restrictions, but are we dealing with a much more sanitised process here?
We're not dealing with a sanitised process. I've been involved in a very real way in the discussions of the different resolutions and the process that we're seeing here today. I mean, it's just extraordinary that we can have this conference in a safe environment, still have the discussions, still have the debate, still have the votes, and it's online. I just think that it's a triumph in organisation.
So we're not rushing things through?
No, we're not rushing things through. In fact, today you can see that there was a vote earlier in the day and the conference stopped for 45 minutes to allow people to vote online. The votes were tallied in the same way and announced in the same way as normal. And there's possibly another vote this afternoon. So the idea that the platform has been revised, that we have heard from all of the groups that would normally participate, the rank and file, the trade union movement, and the resolutions have been arrived at. But that doesn't mean there's no contested votes. There clearly has been and there will be.
Well, Linda Burney, it is going to be a very busy afternoon and evening for you, I'm sure. Thank you for making the time to speak with us.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you so much for your interest.
Matthew Doran there with that report. Well, as floodwaters go down across New South Wales, the damage left behind is becoming more and more apparent. Debris, including electrical goods and dead livestock, is floating ashore, littering beaches up and down the state's coastline. Reporter Cecilia Connell has the details.
I'm here at the New South Wales Maritime Headquarters at Rozelle.